There's one thing that you talked about that really stands out because it resonates so much with me. But you've talked about how you used to be so particular and such a control freak. And it wasn't until you became a mother and started your own business that you learned a little bit more about the concept of letting go. So I'm curious, how has your relationship with control changed over the years?
I learned to let go of control, and that is a very graceful way of saying that the control, it just gets knocked out of you. You try to hang on and you try to hang on, and the forces that be around you and the chaos around you just becomes greater than what you can hold on to. So I don't think there was ever some lesson that I got and I was really conscious about it. No, I think the storm came and my little fingers were ripped from what I thought I had control over. And my little fingers are being ripped every day. It's not like I'm now in this state of, I have absolutely no control over anything and this feels great.
Yeah.
I think it's life. As you're saying this, I haven't thought about that in so long. But as you're saying this, I'm remembering the way that I used to make my bed when I worked for someone else. And my responsibilities were like getting to work, coming home, brushing my teeth, and making my bed. And outside of that was like pay a parking ticket if I had one and have fun.
Good times.
The way that I made my bed was insane. It was a crazy person making a bed. And the way that my bed is now, I wish that I could take you up to my bedroom and you could see the way that my bed looks now at 12:17 p.m.
Oh my gosh. It's so funny because I really resonate too. I feel like back in the day, and I'm still learning how to like relinquish control. And like you said, it's not something you just like wake up and you let go of. But I used to be so particular about the kitchen sink and everything being put away. And I remember my husband, when we first moved in, it was during COVID. He's like, it's okay to keep some dishes. And I'm like, no, it like has to go away. As I started my business and it continued to grow, I am telling you, I am a completely different person. I let the plates be in the kitchen. My bed, similarly, I used to like nicely put the throw on there. Oh, I just like quickly do it and throw the pillows. But it's amazing how much I've changed. My husband's like, the best thing that ever happened was you starting the business. Like I'm on like the other side now, which is funny. But no, that definitely resonates with me.
But I think, like if you have that personality, it's something that you may work with forever. I don't know, because I'm not in my 80s yet, but I wonder, will I still be working with that in my 80s, or will I just be, well, my children will be grown and hopefully I will not be working the way I am in my 80s.
Yeah.
And so there may just be more spaciousness in a day and a little more grace. But yeah, it's something that I work with daily. And I feel my nervous system, I feel the parts of my body that become uncomfortable when things are very clearly out of my control. I would argue that ultimately nothing is in my control, but there's this like illusion that I walk around with that, maybe like 70% is in my control, and that makes me feel comfortable in my body as I work around. And there are those days, whether it's parenting, I feel like I'm a little bit better with the parenting part than I am with the entrepreneurship when everything just feels chaotic and out of control. That makes my body a little bit more uncomfortable. Yeah, but I try to remind myself that the days that I feel in control, it's some kind of illusion. We don't really know what's happening.
It's so true. Perfectly said. And I love what you said around you will instantly, or you'll feel it more in your body, which I have finally now connected with my body. So I can quickly engage like, oh, that message or that email I got, like I see the shifts in my body. What do you do in that moment when you feel like, okay, something feels uncomfortable? I clearly feel out of control. You have that logic to know. What are some steps that you do in those situations?
So in those moments, I think there was a time that I had tools. And so the minute I would feel discomfort in my body, whether it was anger or fear or I mean, I guess it all boils down to like anger and fear. And we could boil those down to just fear, but like some discomfort in my body. There was a time when I had these tools. And so I'd try to like start using the tools immediately, whether that was some kind of breath or that was some thought or some, which in a way is another form of control.
Yes, it's so true. It's so
like,
true.
a more studied, quote unquote conscious form of control. But I'm still sitting in the same seat, like trying to control it. And so maybe in that moment, I could control it and contrive it and like make it fit into something that felt more in control for me. But ultimately, the feeling is still there. So it's been in these last few years that I've gone more into I'm really upset, and that's okay. And that's actually valid. And so I've just been like leaning more and more into this feeling of I'm really freaked out. I'm really scared. This feels like groundlessness. And then I just stop and I'm like, in many ways, that's true, Amanda. This is a lot. This is intense. You are scared, and that is totally understandable. And you know what? Like I got that voice from parenting my children, in particular my daughter, because she's my second, because I had her in my late 30s. And so I bring a little more wisdom to my daughter's life. But it is, I've learned a lot from parenting this second time around that, when one of my children is upset, afraid, tantruming, what have you, for me to say, you're all right, you're fine, you're not hurt, you're not upset, there's not a problem. They continue to tantrum and they may shut up to pacify you in that moment, but it's going to come out later in that night if they're lucky. And if not, they continue to hold it in and it's going to come out in adulthood. And that's a burden that they're going to walk around with. So, really, for my children, and again, for my daughter, who's like Gemini Cancer cusp and has a lot of water in her chart and is highly feminine, when she freaks out, I hold her, don't try to fix her. And I just say, I know, it sounds so hard. I hear you. Oh, baby, I know. And it's then that she really gets to be in that place, and that place is okay. And it leaves very quickly. And then we kind of laugh about it. And so it was actually, it was through her and seeing how, I could bring that kind of compassion to her. And I wasn't bringing that kind of compassion to myself. And I was bringing a lot of like new age like control, new age. I don't know. But not compassion.
Yeah. I love that you learned that through your daughter, because if you can just, I love what you said, like feel the feeling, acknowledge yourself, don't have too much judgment. That moment will just pass, right? Like if you just cry it out, you have a tough moment, you feel that fear for whatever reason, it typically gets better once you kind of live through it, don't have judgment, and then you're on to kind of the next thing. If you're able to like really be in that moment and not think you're crazy, which I have to kind of stop myself sometimes. But I love all this. And, I'm actually curious about your upbringing. I did not know much about you until I was doing prep. And I know you grew up with such interesting parents. Your mom was like this incredible businesswoman and your dad was a musician. And I'm curious, what was it like for you to grow up in that environment? And I'm sure there's so much to dig in here, but how do you think it's impacted maybe the woman that you are today?
I felt so much like an individual. When I started Moon Juice, I was in my 20s, and I felt like this is my own idea. This is my own path. And, I'm in my 40s now, and I can really appreciate, yeah, some of it was an idea that came to me that I chased after, but it was also something that I watched, something that I grew up in, something that was shown to me very early on, that my mom worked. She was the breadwinner in the family, and she was always at work and had long hours and was an entrepreneur. Her business partner was female. My grandmother worked. Grandmother was a single mom with 3 kids and had multiple jobs in a day. So I've really come to appreciate that and recognize that where we come from and what we're shown has a lot to do with where we go, and to not take it for granted.
It's so true. And what's also interesting, and I'm curious if this is accurate, but they both didn't seem like conventional parents. And I feel like after high school, you didn't go down the conventional route. You actually dabbled in many different things, which I find so interesting. So tell me more about that, because it seems like you were really finding your passions and kind of jumping around a few instances to figure out maybe who you were or what you wanted to do.
Well, finding your passions feels like another graceful description of what was really going on. So thank you for all of your flattery. I was very quote unquote bad at school at a certain point. And I think there's so much new thinking around learning styles that I see now around learning. Disabilities feels like the wrong word. Neurodivergence also doesn't seem quite like the right word, but there is this acknowledgement that, people think and process very differently. And I think like Richard Branson has this incredible work that he's doing around dyslexia. I think his foundation is built by dyslexia. There's so much information now around ADHD. And so I think it's incredible that we can think about all of these things as now being a feature, and that because you don't process in the same way that 8 out of 10 people do in the same room, it doesn't mean you're not going to get there. You're going to get there in a different way. The path will be different, and you may see things differently. So that was very much me. And, it was the 90s when I was in high school. And so the thinking was not, how can we examine your processing? How can we work with you in a way that's going to make sense for you? What does this mean? It was like, here's some speed. Maybe that'll help. And then if you can't sleep, here's a downer. Here's an upper, here's a downer, which did nothing to help me process anything better. And so the feedback that I always got on report cards and from teachers were, she's really smart, she's really passionate, but she's simply not applying herself. I think that kind of feedback as a child got in my head. And I started to feel like, well, how is everybody else applying themselves? Like I see people sitting down and doing homework and performing on tests with ease. I see my friends doing that, and there's like something missing for me. And I know that I am passionate and I'm so curious, but this is just not working for me. So I did not go to extend that pain for another 4 years with university. And I think, I could look at my path out there in the world as really experiential, hands-on learning, which is very much how I learn. So it wouldn't have worked for me to think about, I mean, now it sounds great. I wish I'd gone to business school. For entrepreneurs listening, there is a time in life. If you have a dream, you can really focus in on what you do best. What do you bring to the picture? And then there is a time in your business when you get to start hiring for what you're lacking and surround yourself with people that can do what you can't do 1,000,000 times better than you could ever attempt to do.
I love that. It's so interesting because there's nothing, I'm similar to you in terms of getting that experience hands-on is how my brain operates. And just going back to now starting a business, my co-founder and I, who's Kaya, my sister-in-law, Drew's sister, we actually got invited to Harvard Business School. I never went to business school. My dad pushed me so hard to go. So it was really interesting to be there. And the questions that they were all asking, it was just interesting because just through our lived experiences, we were able to manage all these incredible quote unquote business questions. And I'm like, we never went to business school. We just kind of like figured things out, which is like the biggest life skill anyone could ever have. So I love that you also feel that way and you have an incredible business and you didn't go down that conventional path. So it's nice to see you've always kind of been hands-on, dabbling in different things. And in retrospect, it all makes sense. I think just kind of throwing out some of the stuff you did, which is so interesting. Like you were in Florence, Italy for a bit. You were a teacher in New Zealand. Then you came back to New York in PR. Then you moved to Argentina. Like that's a lot. Talk about experience. So I'm sure there's so much to unpack there. We would need like a few hours, but I'm curious, as you were zigzagging through it, I believe maybe New York or Argentina was the last bit of your career. At what point were you like, you know what? I actually might want to do my own thing. Or when did you really reflect on, what does Amanda want? What does Amanda want to do as your next step?
Well, there were a few steps before Moon Juice. So Moon Juice was not the first attempt. Moon Juice is the one that landed, and it's the one that I'll remember. It's the only one my kids know. And so, it's interesting. It's kind of like relationships. There's a bunch of missed dates that you're never really going to remember at the end of life. You're going to remember Drew. That's going to be your life story. And so I almost feel like as an entrepreneur, we probably all have these like little like failed flings, missed connections, dates that happen. And then there's the one. And so, I hear from people and they're like, I don't know what to do. I feel like a passionate entrepreneurial person, but like, how do you know what you're supposed to do? And it's like, you just go. But I think the biggest parts of entrepreneurship is naivety. I think that really serves. Like if I knew everything that Moon Juice was going to entail, and like here I am 13 years later,
Wow.
I don't know if I would have signed up for it, to be honest. So your passion serves you. It does. And it's maybe the thing that gets you through. And then your resilience. And there's like so much to just being resilient and gritty and adaptable and like being the person that can just keep waking up and keep doing the same thing until it sticks.
And I'm curious, I love that you mentioned, Moon Juice wasn't the only thing that you tried. You did dabble in different things.
Yeah.
What was maybe one of those things that were most impactful that didn't work out for you? That you're like, all right, I learned my lesson and I might approach the next idea, whether it was Moon Juice or your, whatever the next idea was, in a different way. Anything that comes to mind?
Oh, yes. I don't have a partner in Moon Juice. One, I think it's a very personal story, but oftentimes people have a co-founder or a partner, and I think there's great comfort in that. I'm often envious. My mom had a partner. I'm often envious of that relationship, but I actually did not take a partner early on at Moon Juice because I had come out of very short and very bad partnership with trying to open a restaurant with someone. And they came to the table with money, and I, was going to have sweat equity, and it was awful. And I was burned. And so I was very wary of starting anything with a partner.
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't reflect on, you've been doing this quote unquote solo for 13 years. That's a completely different dynamic than having a co-founder for those times where you're like fear-based or scared or something happened. You can call them to kind of strategize on something. At least I know that's something I lean on Kea with, my co-founder. But do you have any, I don't know if it's informal advisors, mentors, friends, or maybe it's your partner, like, do you lean on anybody in those moments where you are just alone dealing with like a complex situation, which is inevitable in business?
Well, I have my team, and there's always the most senior team member. So, right, I placed a CEO. It's been less than a year. So she is a great comfort to me, but ultimately it's still me at the end of the day, and like no matter how big you become, no matter how successful your company is, no matter how profitable and fast that growth is coming at you, you are still standing alone as a founder, at the end of the day, like everybody could wake up tomorrow and get poached or decide they're burnt out and leave. And it's just me. And that is the like, I will tell my husband these fears. He's like, but that's not going to happen.
I know, but
It
you
doesn't
feel
matter
it.
that it's not going to happen. It could happen. And this is what you hold and walk with every day as a founder. And as a solar founder, you're on that path alone. And yes, I have board members. Yes, we have investors. But truly, as the majority shareholder
Mm-hmm.
and the founder, and I'm still in the trenches working every day, like,
Yeah, it's so interesting. I literally was just telling my husband Drew the other day, I'm like, the weight that you feel as a founder, it's like I've always had jobs where I worked a lot, but the weight is something new. And it's interesting to hear you kind of reflect back, no matter how big you are. And even when you do have that CEO, you still feel that weight. Cause you're right. At the end of the day, I have fears. Oh, the whole team will go. It's just going to be me. It's just, like non-logical fears. But yeah, it's this weight component that you still carry. And if something goes wrong, it's still on you at the end of the day. Like you can't hide, you can't quit, you can't leave and go to another job. It's just Amanda is still there 13 years later, day in and day out.
yeah,
There's no hiding.
it's really crazy. And 13 years in, and there was, there's like the year and a half that I was working a part-time job and trying to get this up and running. So it's been longer than 13 years, but 13 years, I'm getting into the place where I'm starting to feel like not normal. there there are pieces to my life where I'm like, this is getting a little strange. This feels not normal. I've been like with this heavy weight, and my lifestyle has been so intense for so long. And at this point, it's been my 20s, 30s, and now my 40s that I've been in on this. And it is hard to find other women that have had this kind of weight and responsibility and lifestyle for this long. And then paired with, I've got 2 kids. So if I'm not working and you hold that weight 24/7, I'm with children, I'm with my family. And so there are just like really normal things that I feel like I miss out on, like irregular social life. You sacrifice when you're a founder, when you're an entrepreneur, like, and you're chasing that dream, you sacrifice. And for some people, that's a 3-year sacrifice. Some people, it's a 5-year sacrifice. Like, I don't know. I'm in year 13 and I'm here to say, like, past a decade, you start to realize like you're a bit of an odd bird at a certain point. It's hard for people to make sense of you when you really like them and they just want to take a walk with you. They want to have a double date with you. They want to get kids together and like go to the beach on a Friday afternoon. And you're like, I'm so sorry. I know 2 years have gone by, but like, I can't hang.
It's an interesting life. And, I'm only 3 years into it, but I have so many friends who are similar to you in terms of they've been doing this for 10 to even 20 years. Right. And it's like they are working exactly what you're saying, just as hard as what it's like for me in my early days. People kind of think like, oh, in the early days, you work all the time to get it off the ground and then you have growth and you're scaling. But like, even when you're much larger years in, you're still working just as hard. And again, I'm so early in my journey, just reflecting back on interviewing women like you. And it's like your life is so different. And it just makes me realize how important it is to have women who are in similar boats, just so you're like, oh, I'm not that crazy. Cause you live such a different life than other people. And I would even imagine as you become a mom, like even the way that looks like is so different and unique.
Yeah.
I don't even have kids yet. And I feel like I'm just living this different lifestyle. And my husband always reminds me, he's like, you've always wanted to be different. And I'm like, you're right. Like I've created this life because I never wanted to be the same as everyone else. And I could imagine 10 years later, I'll be like, wow, I'm very different than a lot of people. So
You do. You start to like wake up to a certain point in your life and you're like, I can't find a lot of people that I can relate to, in
yeah.
particular women. It's an interesting path I'm still very much in it. You know, there's a lot of advice given to me. Actually, you talked about like, do I have advisors? Do I have mentors? I do. And a lot of them are friends. And so I go to them for little bits of advice. Many of them are men. And so, you know, I take that with a grain of salt because I'm a very hands-on mom. So that's a totally different thing. Many of them have been CEOs, but not founders. And so that's a different thing. So it's like, it's very niche. I've come to realize that you are a female founder. And then I would say also majority stakeholder, majority owner, because to be a founder where early on you raise big money and you no longer have majority, like, and I think we were shown this vision a lot in like the girl boss era. There was a picture of what that looked like on Instagram. And I would always think, I'd be like, gosh, how are they like always on airplanes with really fancy bags and their offices have like insane floral arrangements? Like, why am I not there? Why am I working in this like gritty office and I'm always working and this is not glamorous? Well, we were never told the complete picture, which is you raise all that money and you lose control over the company. And so, what is your job then? It's very different when you have control over your company. It's a very different pressure. There's a different pressure when you don't have control and you are essentially working for private equity or, you know, a VC. But there's so much I've learned as you're just in the trenches and going. And so much of it is just not glamorous. There's so much of it, you know, to kind of go back to what we were talking about in the beginning, the control part and the fear. There's so much of it that is just very scary. And I find it actually scarier now, having 13 years later, like a big, successful, profitable company. I'm finding it scarier now than in the very beginning when I look back at that and it's like, oh, you know, the wind could have blown the wrong way and like you'd be out.
It's so true. And that's also something that I've learned. And I appreciate you being so vulnerable and real because that's the intention of this podcast. I'm like, we glorify entrepreneurship and being on the Forbes cover and 30 under 30 and 40 under 40. I'm like, it's not like that behind the scenes. And I'm like, am I the only one? And which inspired me to do this podcast and be like, oh, you're my people. I get it. Like I'm with you in the trenches and it's not fun. And it's interesting that you've said as the business grows, that magnitude and that fear changes. And I could imagine now, you know, in my business, things will mess up. And we always say, well, thank God we're still smaller, quote unquote, and quote unquote under the radar, you know, but when you're growing, there's a different magnitude. So I could imagine that, which is good to know.
Yeah. Your team gets bigger, you know, who you communicate with, how you communicate, exits from company. I mean, it's just like, wow, it's a lot. It's a lot. And there's also this feeling that as a leader, you've done this before. You know, you're in like this position of you've got to have the answers. Well, you have to make it look that way for sure. And that's part of leadership is remaining calm, remaining strong, being able to communicate things in a way that's really going to work for your team, prioritizing your team. It's a lot like parenting. Not that I would infantilize any of my team members, but that role where you don't get to have a bad day. Like work is not where you go to tell people, gosh, this is like really big and scary. That's you have to save that for yourself and work it out, you know, in the few hours that you have to sleep and brush your teeth and feed yourself. And then like before you know it, it's 8 a.m. and you're back at it. And so there's not a lot of processing time.
It's so interesting. And I want to take a step back for a second because I feel like we never talked about the origins of moon juice. And I'm going to fast forward a little bit because there's so much to unpack. But what I find so interesting is that, you know, moon juice started as your first store was in Venice. You were housing different products. Like, tell me more about the intention you had for the business at the time. and how it kind of shifted, because so much of Moon Juice has been organic and you putting in the work and taking one step after another. Not like this is a business plan. In 13 years, we're going to have all these products and this and that. But tell me more about the intention you had and how the business kind of evolved over time.
Yeah. Well, the intention is, and I actually was reflecting upon this Saturday morning because I spent my Friday night from like 11 p.m. till 1:30 a.m. going through all of these reviews, like years of reviews that had been left on our website. And I just like, looked at a few products and like went through and read every single review. And it really blew my mind. And I hadn't done it in a while. But it was kind of this incredible moment to really reflect upon like, oh, wow, this is exactly what I wanted to do. And it's actually happening now. And so the intention had always been from day one for Moon Juice to be a place of healing and education. And so I put an autoimmune condition into remission using plants called adaptogens, using minerals like magnesium, using truly bioavailable vitamins. And that was long ago. That was 15, almost 20 years ago. So it was before social media. It was before smartphones. Where I was getting that information, it was certainly pre any kind of wellness industry. It was through kinesiologists and TCM practitioners, Ayurvedic practitioners, like dusty old books from the library, like ordering things like maca and shatavari directly from companies, in like 5-pound bags. And so that was my own healing journey. And I thought, wow, like this was very hard for me to get this information. And what it did to my body was profound. And it didn't take that much time. And there was nothing unpleasant about it. In fact, it was pleasurable. But I thought the amount of money that I have spent on seeking out these esoteric practitioners that I have access to because I'm in Los Angeles, like, I don't think a lot of people are going to do that. I don't think they're going to know to do that. I don't think they're going to be in this same place. And so how can I take all of this wisdom that, is coming from many different cultures, and we've known this as humans for thousands of years, and it's gotten lost in the shuffle. Why is this not part of pop culture? I really want to make this kind of education and access to these kind of tools as like pop culture daily life. And I really want to reach people that are not bulkman heroes. They're not like cruising their local co-op. I just want to find mainstream people and deliver this. And so 13 years later on the last Friday, staying up way too late, reading all of these reviews, I was like, that we're doing it. There were reviews from 68-year-old women. There was a review that a daughter had written in after her 81-year-old father had requested that she went onto the website to leave his review about a sleep product. We had a woman who is stationed in the Middle East that's using our electrolyte to put into the plastic bottles of water. That's the only way she can stay hydrated. There are all types of people that, I was never going to reach on Rose Avenue in Venice.
That's incredible. Like I just have goosebumps because it's literally what you've wanted has now manifested, and you have just such incredible products, so many products. Like I love the brand. You have made wellness so approachable. And I think just to remind anyone who's listening, like you were very early. There was no wellness industry. You are a huge creator in all this. And I'm curious, at what point were you like, because I believe in the story, you were sourcing from other people, different brands. Was that experience helpful for you to be like, you know what, I actually think I can create even a better product? Like, what was that transition like? And what was that first product that you did? Because that took you guys to another level, I think.
So the first CPG, which, like I think you mentioned it before, yes, the growth has been very organic. Never did I sit back with like, some background in business, whether it was like I was a banker or I worked at a VC or I went to business school and learned how to do this. This was very organic. Like I've had my own healing experience, I have a background in fine dining. I know how to prepare food. I think if I got this tiny little shop on Rose Avenue, I could press the juices, I could get the raw ingredients, like I could blend them into almond milk, we could do all of this. And so I started to have clients. I mean, we had celebrity clients, we had people flying in from New York and their first stop would be Moon Juice. And so I was there and like kind of alchemizing, and they would give me whatever they were working with. And so we would find adaptogens and mushrooms and other herbs to help them out. And it was really working for them. And so they'd come in and ask if I could put just like some powder in a jar so they could take it back to New York or take it to Paris and like try to make their own almond milk and blend it in. And so that happened enough that I was like, this is crazy, me with the powders at night and a baby trying to like blend them up for people. I have identified like the 7 biggest complaints that people have and essentially what they all fall under. And I worked with a master herbalist to create those formulas. And so we put those in kind of like rainbow little
So
jars,
fun.
and put them on the shelf. And that was my, again, my like very organic foray into CPG, which I had no idea what CPG meant at
Yeah.
the time. It just intuitively made sense. And beauty editors picked that up. And so we got press. And then, of course, people calling into the shop. How can I get this? We had Sephora call us.
Wow.
Very like, hats off to Sephora and Target that were both knocking on our door more than a decade ago. So it's been very, very organic. So the dusts were our first products, and I made them because there was nothing out there like that.
And I'm so curious, with Sephora and Target knocking on your door, you were still so small. Did you have to say no to those opportunities, or did you just figure it out, raise money to get it out? Because that's like a whole other level of scale and funding required.
It is, I had to say no. I was really jazzed by the excitement that people had, but I had to say no. And it took time. It took time getting my brain around doing a raise. And my first one was not a raise. It was really somebody that went to Moon Juice and really saw the vision and invested and knocked on my door. So thank God for that, because I was absolutely in no place to go out and fundraise. And so, yeah, that helped fund that initial push, and a second store location, and a commissary and a website.
Oh my gosh. I love this slow and organic approach you took, because we don't talk enough about that. Like, you've been doing this again for so long. And I love that it was just you following your own interest from your own experience. You were there with the customers, hands-on, understanding those problems to create those, 7 products. So it was just like one foot in front of the other, and you doing what you do best of, like, it seems like just listening, creating these concoctions that you were working through. And what's so cool about your background in fine dining is everything is delicious. And as someone who creates products, doing a good flavor and keeping it clean is not easy. So bow down to you, because I know it's not easy at all. And that's like the hardest part. So I have a lot of appreciation there. And, we've talked about this a little bit throughout the journey, but what keeps you going? What gets you inspired? Because sometimes, when you are in that operations mode, right? And I know you have amazing cookbooks too. So you do have to tap into that creativity part of your brain, right? How do you stay motivated and inspired throughout the journey?
I will tell you that clicking into my 40s and having 2 kids and having done this now for over a decade.
Tell me everything.
Yeah, it's I'm having to find new tools, and I'm having a different relationship with it. And maybe this is like a marriage, There's like this effortless passion in the beginning of a marriage, and it's all happening. And I imagine, I'm on 7 or 8 years of marriage. And so like you hit that 7 year mark and it's like, oh, this becomes a different relationship and it's more valuable and it's a bigger thing, but there's some learning and adjustment. So I think, this last year, I've come at it and I've come at it in some different ways. I feel like my passion and like drive and will was so physical for the first 12 years. And I also muscled us through a pandemic. I muscled us through a raise. I muscled us through a change, like a complete rehaul of my leadership team. All the while, I had a baby that I was nursing and co-sleeping with. And so I kind of came out of that and used this last year to think about ways that I could continue on leading a company, leading the vision, staying inspired, growing, and to not use my body in the same way. In that, like, I have sheer will. And my kinesiologist will talk about it a lot. He's like, your mind moves very fast and you have this like iron will. And I can identify that in myself. And I think you need that as an entrepreneur. And I reached the place where it's like, my body is changing. There's also just like the amount of road that your body is like muscled through, that if I'm going to keep at this, because we've not reached the vision yet. We're not there. Like, I've got bigger things I want to do, bigger places we're going, and we're moving very quickly. How can I click into this next gear? And so the first thing that I did, and I don't know that I've ever done this, is actually really prioritizing time alone. And so I took a trip with friends for a few days to Japan, and I walked. I went to Paris for 4 days alone, and I walked. And just being able to let go and say, I have great people in place. My family is fine. My husband can take care of kids. I need to go be quiet and walk and recharge and let some of that inspiration come back in. And so I think I could be better at it, but that's like, to just kick it off was like, no, I need to take time off, and not time off where it's like one night in a hotel in LA where I'm on my phone reading work emails. That doesn't count.
That's big because, you have a lot of women, at least I have friends I can speak personally about, who are like, that car ride for me is like the only time I can be by myself. And they're like, it's the best thing ever. I don't mind driving to work because, they have young kids. They also are badasses in work, whether they're doctors or they have their own businesses. But I love that you're carving out time to yourself, because again, I'm only 3 years in, but there's weeks where it's similar to you. I can muscle through, and that willpower is too strong. I have to like rein myself back, which, like you said, you do need it to get anything off the ground. But I remember there was like a day the other day where I looked at my husband. I'm like, I don't feel joy. Like, I don't think I'm depressed. It was just like, again, he reminds me a moment in time. I might have not slept well. That typically will get me on that path of just being tired if I don't sleep well. So I'm big on sleep. But yeah, it's just a good reminder of like taking time to yourself, self-care, to like keep yourself inspired even at your levels, which is, again, you have so much potential for the brand. And I feel like you guys are like just getting started. I'm so appreciative, Amanda, of just you being so honest and real about your journey. I feel like I could talk to you for hours picking your brain. So many learnings that I'm, taking notes on for myself. But this was so much fun. Thank you for joining us today. Love everything you guys are doing, and just, excited to continue cheering you on.
Oh, thank you. And thanks so much for having me. Hopefully I'll get to see you and Drew in person. Or if you ever come up here.
We'll come up there. We could use some nature, so we'll do it.
You actually could use some nature.
Yeah.
I can say is a yes.
Why not?
Yes, which is, we talked about how is it living up here? And it's like, well, mostly I'm just working on the computer, but those weekends, like, just to lay down in the grass, to just walk barefoot, to just have sunshine. Like that is so big.
I love that. And how you recharge yourself from those weekends just in nature. It's a good reminder for sure.
Yeah.
Amazing, Amanda. Thank you so much.